There is a solution for that is sponsored by VARC Solutions. VARC Solutions helps small businesses succeed by delivering expert QuickBooks bookkeeping, consulting, quick-base development, and integrated solutions. If you own a small to medium-sized business that uses QuickBooks or QuickBase, the experts at VARC Solutions can help. In business since 1999, with people who care and the knowledge and experience to solve your toughest problems. Visit varcsolutions.com for all your QuickBooks needs. Welcome back to another edition of There's a Solution for That, where we help small businesses succeed by discussing challenging business problems and best-in-class solutions. All right, welcome everybody to the latest episode of There's a Solution for That. We, as always, have impressive guests on our show, and Panda Ludwig is no exception to that. Panda Ludwig is the CEO of Increase Expert, and we are going to be talking about culture and accountability. So, Panda, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thank you, Brad, so much for having me. I have to say, I've been thinking about this all day because it's an honor, of course, to be invited to be on a podcast. But when you're invited on a podcast by someone you know, I've been nervous all day, Brad, because I really want to nail it for your guests. I want to give them really great, insightful information because I know you, we're friends. And so the bar is high today, but I'm really excited.
No, that's awesome. Well, who is it that said, 99% of success is showing up or something, something like that?
Well, we're winning.
I know it's like, you showed up, so we're already we've already been successful just by showing up today. So thanks for joining. And I know you're right. We've known each other for a long while, and I would say mostly in that sort of that accounting, QuickBooks, consulting type of space. But I know you've done a lot more on the training, client advisory, coaching type of practice, and have some experience with this topic of accountability and also culture. And so that's why we wanted to have you on the show today to kind of share your knowledge, wisdom, experience, best practices, things like that. And so why don't we just go ahead and get right into it? I know when we think of accountability, that could affect different areas of the organization, right? That could affect specifically ownership, right? It could affect managers. It could affect frontline people, salespeople, all sorts of people in the company. So maybe just kind of talk a little bit about your experience with accountability, and then we'll kind of go into there.
Well, my first bit of advice would be to not put the word accountability in the title of this podcast, because 0 people will want to listen, because it's such a topic we kind of shy away from it. Accountability sounds an awful lot like accounting. And we know that, statistically speaking, second to going to the dentist, the second person in America that people least want to visit is their accountant. So that means people in an industry like ours, people want to see us second to getting a root canal, right? So like accounting, accountability, those just sound way too similar for people to be excited about. And accountability kind of has a bad rap because we think of accountability and we think of being rigid. We think of being confrontational, maybe to our employees as leaders. And so the word accountability really isn't a very popular topic to speak about. So I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today, because I would love for your listeners to sort of leave with a different mindset of, well, that's another way to think about it, because accountability at its core is just doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And who doesn't like that idea? That's how we want to be as people. That's how we want our clients to perceive us, our teams to perceive us. For the most part, we desire to be that person. So if we define accountability like that right off the top, then it becomes an easier thing to talk about. But what I'd like to focus on specifically is accountability in business, and looking at it from the lens of a positive part of business that is absolutely vital. We want to have profitable businesses. We want to hire and retain the best teams that we can get. And we want to love our companies. As leaders, that's an important part. Why would we go into business and start something that we hate, right? So
Right.
if we want to love our companies, we want to hire and retain the best teams, and we want to have profitable companies, I would love to visit the idea today that accountability is a thread that runs through all of those, which you can call me crazy. We're friends, Brad. You can call me
Yeah.
crazy if you want to. But just as an intro, the thread that I see running through that is statistically at our core, we actually desire a level of accountability. Most people, if you ask them, like, do you love being held accountable? Their answer would be what?
Probably not.
Probably not. If you ask most leaders, do you enjoy having to hold your team accountable? Their answer, again,
Probably
probably
not.
a lot of no's. But if you ask people, if you ask teams, do you enjoy having clarity about your role in this company? The answer is almost always yes.
Right.
And so when we tie clarity to accountability, it then no longer seems like a negative. So that's where I see the thread of accountability in everything we do in business. When we say we want to hold our team accountable, well, you can't hold someone accountable, or you shouldn't, as a leader, hold someone accountable if you haven't been very clear of what you're holding them accountable to.
Right.
Then flip that into leadership. How can I say, as a strong leader, there's so much, well, they should have known that, we're all adults here. That's a really common one. Like, they should know, common sense should tell you that, right?
Right.
We, you're a business owner, I'm a business owner. These are things that are kind of natural, like, well, anyone would know. But when we tie it to accountability, we then as leaders are accountable to ensure we've provided clarity to that team member. So
Right.
it shows up in teams, it shows up in finances. It's like running a company with no budget and then being surprised at the end of the year that you didn't hit the goal, right? It's accountability and clarity, and tying those two together, I think, is a topic that again, if you don't include accountability in the title of this podcast, then I think if we don't include that in the title, I think we're really onto something worth talking about.
Well, maybe I'll change the title to just be how do you avoid accountability
Right.
or how
Avoidance.
not to be accountable.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
something
I
along
think
those
that would be
lines.
very popular podcast.
Yeah, people are going to be like, "Oh, I want to watch that one.
Yeah,
I want to check that one out."
exactly.
Well, it's interesting because, you're right. It affects all areas. A bank, that you might have loaned money from to buy a business, or that you have outstanding loans for, they certainly want you to be accountable to running your business well, paying them back. Um, you've got employees who I would imagine want you to be accountable to making sure that they get paid,
Right.
that you honor promises and commitments that you've made to them. Customers want you to be accountable to giving you, providing the services and goods that they're paying for. So I really do think it affects everybody. When you were talking, one of the thoughts that came to my mind was that I think it's age old wisdom that's maybe a little bit contrarian on the surface, and that's that, children, as an example, they desire discipline and structure. Like I've heard that phrase so many times, and I always think to myself, do they? Do they desire discipline and instruction? And like, people that work with children, just as an example, I mean, they're adamant. It's like kids need structure. They desire structure. And it just makes me think, I don't think they desire the structure, but they desire that other thing, kind of like you were saying about clarity. There's this other thing they really, really desire,
Mhm.
maybe, which is consistency or predictability,
Right.
or those types of things, right?
Yeah. And I actually, I'm bringing this out because I'm in the process of writing a book, which makes me even more mindful of making sure I credit authors properly. So I made sure I marked this. So a really interesting book on the topic. Gretchen Rubin is the author. It's called The Four Tendencies. And she she puts folks into sort of 4 categories. And one of those categories are the people who actually consider structure or discipline to be their freedom. So there is a group of people, and so in our companies, there's a group of people who look at structure or discipline as a mode of freedom. Only 19% of the population fall into that category. I will say I am one of those people. I will shout it from the rooftops that I have a household budget, I have a company budget, and having budgets gives me freedom because I never have to wonder, should I spend this and feel guilty if I've spent, or wondered if since I overspent, what's going to be the consequence later down the road. I never have guilt about spending a penny because it's on a budget that tells me, hey, you have this much money. Panda, you can buy those shoes because it is in the budget and I can buy them and I can walk away guilt free. So that's only 19% of people
Mm.
actually say, they have that sort of internal accountability, I guess you would say, which means if my math is correct, 81%, check me on that math.
Mhm,
Is that all
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
81% of the population, 81% of our customers, 81% of our teams. These people actually thrive when they have accountability that comes external. So
Mm.
19% of people thrive from an internal accountability,
Mm.
81% of people thrive from external accountability. And
Yeah, that's a little
why?
shocking.
Yeah, and it's it's what's really great about that study is that it puts people into 4 categories, not one better than another, but simply this is how people function, this is how they think, and how do you bring the best out of people.
Mhm.
But what I found was interesting is that for 3 of the 4 categories, 3 of them desperately want clarity. They
Mhm.
want to know, is what I'm doing, is this correct? Is this what you expect of me?
Yeah.
Am I doing what I am supposed to do every day? There's some people who thrive on the praise of being told, "Hey, you did a great job on that." Some people can live in an environment where as long as you don't tell me I did something wrong, I know everything, I did everything correct,
Oh,
so we're
yeah.
okay. But either way, there is some type of clarity, there's an expectation, it is clear, and then it's either reinforcing that you did everything correctly or letting them know, I will let you know if something is outside of the expectation. So,
Yeah.
either way, we're talking about a majority of people actually do, like you said, children crave structure. A
Mhm.
majority of people crave a form of accountability, which
Yeah.
is clarity and holding me to whether or not I did what the expectation was.
It's interesting, because, I'm thinking about that 81% right now, and in my company, I mean, there's a few folks that stand out distinctly related to what you just shared, but they're very, very different people. One in particular that doesn't like any, kudos. He doesn't want, quote, unquote, "pats on the back." I mean,
Mhm.
who doesn't? But, you know,
Sure.
this person has said, I don't really,
Mhm.
need the pats on the back, but for someone who feels like they need to give, positive reinforcement, that's a way of saying you did well, you met my expectations. People are very happy with what you're doing, regardless of whether or not somebody, needs to hear that to feel like they're doing a good job or not. I think those are still good things as a leader to communicate. And then on the complete opposite of that, I've got somebody else on my team who, they go out of their way to say, Brad, I need some feedback. Can you
Mhm.
tell me how I'm doing?
Mhm.
Even though I might have in the previous meeting said, you're doing amazing, you're doing great, right? They need that additional, they're not just looking for pats on the back, but they need that additional, reinforcement that,
Mhm.
yes, you are specifically doing fine, and no, I don't have anything I need you to change or do differently. But they're also, good employees, so they're looking
Yes.
for, hey, what can I do better? what could I have done better on that call, or what could I have done better with that client? And so to me, that's that clarity that you're talking about. It may not be, here are the rules and please follow these rules. They're perfectly clear and now be accountable, but they do want accountability. They do want clarity on the, you know, are they meeting expectations? Are they doing a good job? Is there anything that they could be doing to improve, that kind of stuff?
And when we don't offer that clarity, that feedback, that accountability, we're actually disempowering our greatest team members, because we want the team members who are just people pleasers and just, want the pat on the back to just always, always need the reassurance that they've done a good job, but the people who are seeking clarity, they are less likely to spend time on low priority tasks, because we've given them the clarity of what are the most important things. These are the highest priority. And because they have that clarity, those most productive employees are going to use that clarity, that information, and the understanding that they will be held accountable for completing it. It drives multiple kinds of people with multiple personalities, whatever the motivation is. If it's clarity, so I'm going to get this done, or it's I have clarity of the expectation and I want the pat on the back, that's my motivator, or it's the I know there's an expectation and I don't want to fall short because I know that there's sort of an accountability check, not living in fear,
Yeah.
but just an understanding, regardless that that's three completely different personality types that can
Hmm.
all thrive in an environment of accountability, which is aligned with the study from the book that I mentioned, that
Yeah.
3 out of 4 people are seeking this accountability essentially, and this clarity.
Interesting, interesting. So I just finished a book by David J. Friedman. He wrote a book called Culture by Design, and he talks about clarifying like the behaviors that an organization expects of its people. And one of the behaviors that he specifically calls out is this whole concept of setting and asking for expectations, right?
Mm.
Set and ask for expectations. And I thought it was just, I mean, it's one of those things that you're like, duh. I mean, but why am I not doing this?
Right.
I
Right.
should know this. I do know this, but
Mhm.
I'm not doing it. Why am I not doing it? But it was, the whole concept of just like you can't hold people accountable if you haven't set clear expectations. If people are trying to hit a target, but you haven't clarified the assumptions about what that target is, I mean, the chances are you're going to go off the rails. And so it seems like some of these things are really kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Which is, if you can be clear about what your expectations are and you can provide that clarity, then it's a whole lot easier to hold people accountable to meeting or exceeding those expectations. So here's my question for you. So let's take somebody who might be listening to this who's like, and I can imagine there's a bell curve of companies out there that are listening to this, right? Some that are doing this incredibly well, some that are kind of doing it in the middle, maybe some that are not doing accountability very well at all, or not doing clarity very well at all. So how do you help? What advice would you have for a company that maybe doesn't have an appropriate level of accountability or clarity in their organization? How do they go from that to, the other side of the bell curve where they're doing it exceptionally well?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And so many things are coming to mind, but I want to start with let's start at the beginning, right? That's always the wisest thing to do. And so first it's overcoming a mindset, because if a company is not doing this to the fullest, it may be a fear of accountability, that if they start with, a mindset of accountability, then are they going to be micromanaging? Are they going to lose people because, now there's a set of rules we all have to live by, or that accountability is going to bring out confrontation, because if you're holding people accountable and they haven't done what's expected, are you going to have become a confrontational leader? There's so many myths around accountability. So the very first step is coming to the table with a mindset of is there another way I could look at this? And I think we've spent the first few minutes talking about that. Let's tie accountability to being clear, to providing clarity. So that's one step in the right direction. Another piece I would say is, as you're looking at your teams, what if this is going to be a far out idea, but what if you looked at areas of your company that are underperforming and say, is it a lack of ability or is it a lack of accountability? Because there are situations where people are in roles that it is a lack of ability. And we all know that. But more often than not, it's actually a lack of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And we can bring people along by putting in metrics for accountability. So I think once we've overcome those first two kind of hurdles, just changing the mindset or being open to a different way of thinking about it,
Yeah.
then looking around and saying, is any area of failure or underperformance ability or accountability, kind of putting them into one or two buckets. If the bucket is accountability, then we get to work. It's going back to the drawing board from day one. And we're going to talk about this in three different areas. So right now, I'd like to talk about in working with employees, then leadership, and then the company overall, how all of this shows up in the finances, right? Because that's where
Yeah.
my expertise really lies, is all of this showing up in finances. But as you know, through your company, the finances tell the story. So we're talking about culture, we're talking about performance, we're talking about employees and leadership. The end of the day, when I look at a set of numbers, everything we're talking about shows up in those numbers. So I think we'll save that one for last.
Yeah.
But when it comes to employees, I think that, you look around and you say, what was their onboarding? When we hired them, what did we communicate? What tools are we giving them for them to be productive? And then by what metrics are we checking those milestones or those goals for them? And we're busy as business owners, right? So thinking of building that out sounds like a lot of work, but the reality is, if we aren't building those things, we're not setting employees up for success.
Right.
And so something I did in my company, two things that, of course, this was developed over years and years. It wasn't just that I was so brilliant. It's because I made enough mistakes to have finally landed on a system that works.
Right.
But one piece was I, clearly laid out the financial structure, and then I gave a series of goals and trainings and certifications to complete, and said, you get to pick. You can decide on your own raise by deciding to, enroll in this training and doing this task. And I laid it all out clearly on day
Mm-hmm.
one. Some people chose to do everything and make the maximum amount of money, which meant working with more complex clients. Some people were quite content to stay on the first level and stayed on the first level for 3 or 4 years, and that was okay with them. But it was never a question of, am I doing okay? Am I doing what's expected? How do I get a raise? It was laid out on day one, literally the first day of employment. This
Right.
is how you get a raise in this company.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
this is how you get bigger challenges, bigger clients. Like, it was very clear. The other thing that I did in this, so that was for the team. The thing I did for me was I had a very clear outline for myself before I ever fired anyone. And Brad, I've fired a lot of people in my lifetime, not for my own company necessarily, but in the past, working for other people. I think I just was the person they hired to fire people. I had one company in my first week, they sent me to fire 2 people in my first week.
Oh
So
my gosh. I
I,
resemble that comment from my past. Yeah.
so so you've hired a person or two in your past. So when
Mm-hmm.
I got
Mm-hmm.
to, having my own company, I said, I want to check myself, because I don't know about you, Brad, but I hate to fire people. I'm sick to my stomach that morning. I dread it. And I would say for the most part, most business owners hate to fire people. In fact, they keep people a whole decade too long because they don't want to fire them.
Yeah, many times.
And so tying that into accountability, something that I had for myself was a checklist that was every opportunity. Did I clarify this? Did I give this expectation? Did I support them in that growth? And I had an actual checklist that checked me as the leader to say, did I provide every opportunity? And if the answer was yes, then I
Mhm.
felt that it was my responsibility to hold them accountable for not doing what was clearly laid out in front of them. But
Yeah,
if the answer was no, then it was back to the drawing board. That meant I had more work to do to develop that employee because I hadn't done my part. So the accountability goes
yeah.
both ways. You have
Well,
to be clear on the expectation.
yeah, and what's interesting about that is, uh, it's like you talk to folks that are in HR, right, or have that sort of background, and they know that you have handbooks, you have escalation, discipline policies, right, and
Right.
all those things. I mean, I think you talk about mindset and how you look at something. Some people would look at that and just say it's all about covering your ass,
Right.
not getting sued,
Right.
all that kind of good stuff, and checking the boxes and doing all the paperwork. But if you flip that around, it's just about being clear that there's a problem.
Right.
Here is the gap between where you're at and where we need you to be. I'm giving you an opportunity to correct this behavior with support,
Mhm.
right? And let's work on this for the next 30 days. And then 30 days later, you're having this conversation again. It's like, well, we haven't seen the improvement. This is an opportunity to know that there's a problem here,
Right.
right? So you could view it as just dotting, checking the boxes and that kind of stuff, and dotting, crossing your T's and dotting your I's and all that stuff, so you don't get sued. But it's really about trying to, like you said, trying to help that employee be successful with clear, here's where you're at, here's where you need to be, and here's what we're going to do to help you. But it's also on you
Right.
to do the things that you have to do to work here long term, right?
Right. And it's so true because companies large enough to have an HR department, they do that well because it's been communicated clearly. Smaller companies like mine that never had an HR team, right? Panda's the head of HR, which is very common in a majority of small businesses. The owner is HR in a lot of instances.
Yeah,
That using that same mindset and the way you just worded it was so wise that it's not just checking the boxes, it's providing clarity and ensuring that you've communicated because who wants to have those conversations? They're uncomfortable.
right,
But with this new mindset of, oh, I'm not being confrontational, accountability is not a bad thing. This team member, 75% of the time, statistically, I'm dealing with a person who actually is seeking clarity. That makes that conversation a lot less uncomfortable and saying, oh, as a leader, it's my job to provide them the clarity so that they can be successful and not making those assumptions of, well, it's common sense. They should know, right? Like,
right.
well, I'll do my part and then if it doesn't change, well, then the conversation is different. But it is a mindset shift to say, oh, that uncomfortable conversation is actually really great opportunity to provide clarity for someone that is actually seeking,
Yeah,
whether it shows or not, but they are actually seeking a little bit of clarity.
yeah, that makes sense. Well, and so I kind of cut you off in terms of your flow there. So you were going to also talk about the financial impact. So
Yes.
tell us about that part.
Yes. So we covered employees, we covered leadership. All of that rolls up into to us number nerds. We see in the numbers when there is a lack of accountability. It shows up in so many different ways. It's would surprise most people that the numbers are telling us this secret story.
Like looking at the financial matrix, and you can
Yeah.
see it.
That's it's so funny you would say that because I use that as the example. I say, it's like looking at the zeros and ones and then there's a story that emerges, but it really does happen. And it shows up in so many different ways. But a really simple example is when companies have uh, either be it via expense reports or employees have company cards, and there is an expectation. It could be this is your travel budget. This is you have this home office allowance and you can do A, B, C, and D. And then in the numbers, it shows up that they are exceeding that budget, significantly exceeding that budget, but no one is taking the time to actually have those conversations of there's a budget, there's a reason, there's a budget, and then it grows and escalates to be a large problem. And next thing you know, people are getting fired because they didn't meet budget for the year. It's like, well, we knew that in January. Like, why are we waiting till December to say we didn't meet budget? And so the way it shows up in the number and the story that it tells is that somebody didn't want to hold someone accountable. There was a handbook somewhere that said this is how we do this.
Mm,
And when something different is happening, sometimes people have forgotten, sometimes people are abusing that ability, but it does show up in the numbers, and you
mm,
can see different things, whether it be a sales goal or a budget cut. The conversation was had, it was decided on, and then all it takes is one time for there to be no follow up, for your entire team to come to the recognition that they're not really watching or it's not really that big of a deal. And unfortunately, depending on the size of your company, that can translate to hundreds and thousands of dollars of waste
mm,
because we didn't have a metric to monitor that. So, with technology as it is now, there's no reason for any company of any size. You could be a team of 5 or 500, but there's so many simple ways to put in budgets, the word that everyone hates, the word that I find to be very freeing. But if you have a sales goal without having a cost goal, I don't actually care anything about your sales goal. People are blown away when I say, I don't want to know what your sales goal is. I don't care. I want to know how you're going to spend the money, because you could generate $10 million and
mm,
have a $1 profit. And that happens all the time.
right.
So it's building in, and you're really the expert in this area. It's building in dashboards. It's building workflows where it doesn't take a CPA and 12 spreadsheets 6 months after the fact to tell us how we're performing. There are things now with the technology we have now, we can get daily updates, and we certainly can have final information monthly within 5 days of the month closing. So that's the piece that I see companies really missing, is using the simple tools, the amazing tools. I know you all build out a lot of tools to just say, hey, we don't have to, as leaders, daily go to our teams and remind them and clarify the expectation. We can give them a dashboard, we can give them a tool, we can give them a report where they can see exactly how they're pacing.
Right.
And it's a great way to use tools to free up our time as leaders to do more of the actual human work of pouring into our teams. So
Right.
there's so many tools out there. Tell me some that are popular or some that serve that exact purpose. I know you know about a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I'm curious about, like, you mentioned budget. And so that would be the other thing that we could put in the title of this that would make people run away and not want to
Yes,
listen at all.
exactly. Not a popular topic. I
But
love budgets, but not popular topic.
But do you think of like budgets the same way as you think of sales goals? Or are they kind of different? Budgets is how much I don't want to spend more on, or is a sales goal just there's another word for revenue budget? I mean, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So when I say I don't care about your sales goal, I mean, obviously I do. You have to have revenue to stay afloat. But I think of it as I shouldn't say less important, but equally as important as how you're going to spend the money. Because there are companies that scaling is a huge buzzword right now. Everybody
Mhm.
scale, grow. And I'm the one on the other side saying, you don't need to grow right now. You need to level out because what your profit is at 5 million, and I've seen this happen in companies. They go from 5 million to 10 million, which is a big jump. That is a huge, like it is,
Mhm.
that's one of those jumps that there's some jumps harder than others, and the 5 to 10 jump is a big jump. And actually have less profit at 10 million than they did at 5 million.
That's
So
interesting.
now they just have more money, more problems, right? They have a
Right.
bigger team, more locations, more
Right.
stress on the owner. They've grown, but the only thing they grew was their revenue. And what
Mm.
I'm interested in is helping companies grow their profit, which
Right.
might mean just stabilizing and staying at the same revenue goal for a while till we correct some of the margins, till we
Mhm.
input some workflows, some processes, some software like what your teams are capable of doing,
Yeah.
some like tightening up so that when you get to 10 million, you're not only making more, of course, than 5 million for your take
Mhm.
home, but that your margins actually grow bigger because you've just got a repeatable process
Right.
that can go from 10 million to 20 million. So that to me, that's really the piece that sort of ties all this together. I said at the beginning, we're going to talk about accountability, but really it's about profit. It's about people. It's about that's in my mind what ties the accountability piece
Yeah.
into the profitability piece. We can, as business owners, say I don't have time. Someone on Brad's team has finished my numbers for the month and they want to cover them with me. And I say, like I'm really busy running my company. We'll look at them next quarter. That's where we're falling short from the accountability and the
Yeah.
profitability side.
Well, how do you go? How do you? I know this is going to sound a little bit strange, but how do you get there? Take the scenario where, maybe you've got a sales team, and you could even collaborate with the sales team and come up with a sales goal. But what about those sales goals that maybe are out of their control? Like they're not in complete control of doing all the things to hit the sales goal. And then how do you hold people accountable to a goal when maybe they don't have complete control over that?
That's a really great question. And I wish I was a sales expert because I think a sales expert would have a proper answer for that. But when it comes to accountability, if I'm holding myself as a leader accountable to looking at the numbers, I'm already looking down the road for what's possible. And if I've created a sales goal that because of a changing economy, something that's happening that is outside their control, I'm adjusting the sales goal to be reasonable. I'm not going to, but I've done it in advance. I've not waited and said, well, guys, you didn't hit your goal, but it's okay. Like it's been kind of rough out there. It's okay.
Yeah.
Instead, I'm working with my money people. I may not be a money expert, but I've got people in my corner who are predicting and projecting and saying, okay, this is what's happening in the world. This is what's happening in the economy. We're changing this sales goal, but just as fast as we're changing the sales goal, we are also changing our spending so that our margins don't get out of line. So a
Right.
lower sales goal that's obtainable and reasonable, and I've communicated it to the team before they've missed the goal.
Yeah, makes total sense. I guess how I would answer that question for me is like, obviously you want something it is something I can control, right? Because then that's empowering. It's like I can own this goal, I can own the outcomes. Is instead of it maybe being a financial sales goal, like hitting a certain dollar amount of sales, you can be accountable to how many calls you make, how
Absolutely.
many emails you
Yeah.
send, how many appointments you try to set. Well,
Right.
and I think, sales is a numbers game, right? You do enough of something, you're
Mhm.
gonna get statistically, within a range of things. So, I think you can have goals that are stretch goals that are maybe harder to obtain and things like that. But yeah, I can make 500 calls this week,
Right.
or I could send out 100 emails this week.
Mhm.
I can, follow up on everybody that hasn't received an email in the last 3 weeks. So
Right.
there are things that you could write,
Mhm.
hold people accountable to.
A-
Um,
And having a proper system, like back to systems, right? We're talking about accountability, a system in place that makes it very easy to track those metrics. How many calls did you make? How many follow ups? How many in
yeah,
your CRM, in your database, being able to easily pull, oh, we haven't spoken to them in 90 days. This is a person I need to follow up on. Having those processes built makes that level of accountability for that salesperson really easy. They're not wondering if they're doing enough. Maybe they're not closing the sales they want to, but they would have the metrics in front of them being like, well, boy, I'm making more phone calls than anybody. I really am putting in an effort because sales can be a little
yeah,
discouraging, right? So
yeah,
metrics for salespeople is very motivating.
yeah. Well, let me. I, I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I want to ask about your thoughts, opinions, knowledge when it comes to two distinct things. Number one is maybe the generational changes. With today's kids these days joining the workforce, different generation, different whatever you want to call that. Whether it's X generation, X, Y, somewhere in between. You've got that and their views on accountability, and then the second part, and you can take these in any order, is obviously over the last 5 years, we've had a big, big, big shift to remote work, right? And so now people aren't sitting in the same office; they're not sitting right next to each other as much. And so how do you create that culture of accountability when you're not sitting next to people anymore and you're all remote and you're able to hide behind a phone or an email? I don't know. What would just kind of share just some thoughts on that you've run into.
Yeah, so I'm seeing this idea pop up a lot in companies, and unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of companies make a huge mistake in this area. So I'll start by saying I'm a millennial. I remember when there were courses because my clients took these courses or sent their leaders to these courses of how to deal with millennials because millennials don't want to work. Like, we're going to have to change everything to deal with these millennials. And now millennials are running companies, right? And like, we've done okay. So
Yeah,
I tend to think that we're always going to think of the next generation that, we don't put a lot of faith in the youngest of generations. Millennials got a bad rap and we're doing just fine.
right.
Um, but society is always going to change and evolve, and how things function in the workplace is always going to it's always going to be a hot topic. But what I think when we talk about generations, sometimes we forget the thing that's common in all of us, which is just humanity and personality types. So we talked at the beginning about these four different groups and how they respond to accountability.
Hmm.
That is multi-generational. That studies did not span just millennials or just another age group. It was multi-generational. And so we know that there is a common thread. What's changed is expectations. Whereas when I first started my career, I wouldn't dream of sitting across the table and saying, these are my demands if I'm going to work here. But the younger generation is comfortable doing that. And in a lot of ways, good for them, right? Because they're they're actually it stings a little bit, even saying it out loud, but they're actually clear about their expectations for their employer.
Hmm.
Eesh.
Yeah.
That's a little bit tricky, right? That's a tough pill to swallow. That they're kind of saying, look, I expect if the role is 9 to 5, I expect to leave at 5. I'm not coming in on a Saturday. I'm not working 60 hours. a 20-year-old me would not have had the confidence to say that. I would not have done that.
Right.
And so it's a little give and take. But I think if we are clear on well, this is the environment we have. And if you're sitting across the table from someone who has an expectation that your company doesn't meet, awesome. That's really great that you had the conversation before you hired someone that your expectations don't align with their expectation of their employer.
Right.
So I actually think that what's happening in the workplace is really cool because younger people are more like feel a little bit more entitled to share what their expectations are of their employer,
Yeah.
instead of thinking, well, I'll just get hired and then I'll do whatever I want to do. They're a little bit more clear up front. And so I think that that's a neat thing. And I think it's important that as employers, we are asking people about their expectations because we have expectations for them, but leaving a little room for them to have expectations for us so we can get those misalignments just taken care of before we even hire someone new.
Well, I love that. And, it's like like I said, we, as owners, as CEOs, we put on multiple hats during our career. And one hat that you and I have both sound like we've shared at some point in our career is the hiring, not just the firing part, but we're putting
Right.
on the hiring part, hiring hat. And I know that, we've in our company, I think we've done a pretty good job of like having, job descriptions. We put out a job ad and it's like, here's what we expect. It's 100% remote, or it's 100% in the office. It's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, whatever those things are. But I can recall a few times during the hiring process where, even though we've done a job ad and we've clarified it's not hybrid, it's not remote, it's in person, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and we've gone interview, 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 and now we're getting to that point where it's like, okay, maybe we're ready to make an offer here. And I've had people at that late stage say, yeah, and so I was curious if working remotely would be an option,
Right.
and it's like, I can't, to me, it's like, I'm just like,
Right.
it, did you not, I mean, we've had this conversation. It
Right.
was on the job description, it was on the job ad, and now I feel like, you've wasted 3 weeks of, or maybe a month and a half of your time. We've wasted a month and a half of
Right.
our time. I mean, I'm glad it came out now, because
Right.
if we hired you, 2 weeks from now, you're going to be like, yeah, so when's my remote day? Whatever.
Right. Right.
And now we've got a
Exactly.
problem. But it is still kind of shocking that people, either they're not reading or not caring or not paying attention. I don't know what the issue is, but it's still sometimes an issue.
Yeah. Well, you used a word in there that one of my mentors, and this will sting a little bit too, but she shared it with me, so I will share it with you and your listeners. That should is very rarely grounded in reality. And so it's like, well, they should know that it was clear in the description, and they should know, like, people should behave in this, like, all of this. And whenever you use, her mindset was, whenever you use the word should, check to see if that statement is grounded in reality.
Right. Check your assumptions. Yep.
Oh, that one has caught me mid sentence more than one time where I said, well, they should. And as soon as that word comes out of my mouth, I immediately have to stop and think that was a really impacting one, for me, is the, tying to this idea of this accountability. There's a lot of things that a lot of people should do, right? That
Yep.
we have a general expectation that they should already know that. Um, but with this mindset of, is your should grounded in reality, it cycles it right back to accountability. Did I, as a leader, clearly communicate the expectation? Did
Yep.
they acknowledge they understood? Like, it's a pretty vicious cycle if we don't think about it going both ways.
Yeah. No, it's a very compelling point to make, and something we should be asking. What are your expectations, not just what are mine?
Right, right.
Well, as we get to the tail end of the webinar, I do want to have you talk a little bit more, if you have any specific thoughts on that remote work scenario, like if you've got a remote structure, um, what are some thoughts on how to create a culture of accountability when maybe everybody is not in the office?
Well, there's actually someone I met through your company who has built an entire remote team who he said we do not have any clock in expectation, no clock out expectation. We we believe our people are working and we kind of work on this trust factor.
Hmm.
And I was like, I remember thinking face to face with this gentleman, I remember thinking, yeah, how long is that going to last? Like, it just sounded too good to be true.
Right.
And the more I heard him talk, and he wasn't bragging, I just noticed over a few days of picking up on little things because I was studying him. I'm not sure he knew I was studying him, but I was studying him because I was really fascinated by this idea of 100% remote with no specific, sort of micromanaging kind of, how is everyone staying productive?
Right.
And the more I heard him speak, just talk about various things, I realized two things specifically. One, he did a lot to engage his team, and he didn't ask them to do anything that he wasn't doing himself. So, he wasn't playing golf and hoping nobody noticed during his remote work day.
Right.
He he was a really driven and dedicated person. That was who he was. And then he actually had activities for the whole team to keep them excited, driven, and engaged. So
Hmm.
the expectations he had of them, he had of himself. So
Yeah.
that really spoke volumes to me. But the other piece of it was while he didn't have any, at 9 o'clock, you punch in, you log in and we'll see if you're not logged in. We'll see if you're not typing, a lot of the metrics that companies have, which I
Yeah.
understand and I think
Yeah.
are probably really important in certain environments. They had really great metrics to track productivity.
Hmm.
So he said, I don't care about the time you invest. If you're not logged in at 9 a.m., I'm not going to call you. But they had really great software. Their technology was top of the line.
Interesting.
So everyone could look and see what needed to be done. If the person before me has to finish their part so I can do my part, I know when they're going to be done. We have
Hmm.
clarity on the timelines. And they used that project management software so that everyone saw what phase everyone was in. And it built, even though they were 100% remote, it built a sense of community
Hmm.
and that they each had to do their part and that everyone could see. And it seemed like it wasn't in a way of, oh, everyone's watching, so I better stay up till midnight to finish this, but rather we're all in this together. So we're all getting it done. And I just will never forget having met him and
Yeah.
learning about his structure because it kind of took me down a path of thinking, well, it's the first step of what we're talking about today. It changed my mindset enough to say,
Right.
oh, well, this is possible. And I think we can learn a lot from that.
Well, I love that. In fact, I've kind of gone both sides of that, depending on the position and things like that. Because, like, there's certain positions that are kind of like on, hey, I need to be here when my clients are here, right? I need to be
Absolutely. Right.
working when my clients are expecting me to answer my phone, right? So
Right.
there are
Right.
some roles and jobs where I need you at 9 a.m. to be on that phone, right? Or
Absolutely.
I'm expecting certain days and times that you're going to work. And then of course there's other positions where it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm producing a work product, I'm doing something,
Right.
but do I do it at 2 in the morning or 10 in the afternoon or 3 p.m. or 10 p.m.? As long as it gets done, it gets done.
Right.
I've seen both sides of that, and a lot of the folks that like remote work really value that flexibility,
Right.
they actually can be many times are more productive because they're working at times when they're most up to working, right?
Right.
they do have that flexibility to kind of take care of some of the home needs or some of the family needs, right? But I can imagine if you're an owner and you maybe don't have that trust and you haven't put certain systems or policies or things
Right.
in place, it's easy to say, oh, I texted this person at 10 in the afternoon and they didn't answer me for 45 minutes. Where were you? You know,
Right.
well, I had to go pick up my kid from daycare, or I had to go get to the grocery store, or my neighbor knocked on my door, or the contractor
Right.
knocking on my door. I mean, how many times has that happened to me, right? The landscaping guy, the roofing guy, the whoever's
Yeah.
knocking on my door. There's all those things. Anyways, I'm blabbering on at this point, but you get the point, right? Is it
Right.
sometimes that's actually a more productive thing because I can work when I am at my best,
Right.
versus trying to put people in a box and say you have to fit into my box.
Right. Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think you just nailed it of the clarity of there is a role that you need to be on the phone at 9 a.m. And there is a role that there's this set of work and it needs to be done in this time frame, like in the next 2 weeks. But
Hmm.
what time of day you're doing it is insignificant. But
Yeah.
that's clarity, right? That's clarity on this role is at a certain time. This role is driven by a certain deadline. And I think
Yep.
when you provide the clarity, then it's amazing, right? How freeing for both people because they know the expectation.
Right. Yeah, it's excellent. So as we conclude this webinar, or not this webinar, but this podcast, any kind of closing thoughts or tips or suggestions, that like I just have to say something about this topic of culture and accountability that you haven't said?
Well, I think we've covered so many things. I think that if someone has listened this long, congratulations to listening to this length of time on accountability. And I think hopefully the takeaway is just starting from being open to the idea that accountability is our friend, that people want accountability and they want it mostly in the form of clarity. And that our best people, actually, the people we want to keep around, those are the people who want to do a good job. So let's give them some systems, some metrics, some tools, some feedback to
Hmm.
let them know that they are meeting our expectation, meeting and or exceeding, because the last thing we want to do is lose a really great employee because there's someone else who isn't meeting the expectation and we're so busy we're just letting it we're so busy or so non-confrontational that
Yep.
we just let it go. And instead of losing the underperforming employee 9 times out of 10, we lose our best employees
Mm,
because we didn't hold everyone accountable.
mm.
So hopefully maybe
Yeah.
we've changed some mindsets today, or at least opened up some minds to saying, this is something I'll think about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you can actually have a little bit of both, in terms of um, making certain things clear and having and holding accountability. In other words, you can say to somebody, "You're meeting all of my expectations in this area over here, but this area, we have some work. There's some things that aren't working quite as well as they need to work." And so again, your job's not on the line, but I
Right.
do want this part of your role or your experience to be different, right? And so can we work on that, right? So I
Yeah.
think you can have a little bit of both, but I think one of the things that I took away from this is don't be afraid of having some of those hard conversations. Don't be afraid of having some of those difficult conversations with folks just because you're like afraid of how they're going to react, or what are they going to think, or are they just going to go quit, or whatever those fears in your head might
Mhm.
be. So definite paradigm shift. I appreciate you being on the show today, Panda. And so if somebody wanted to get a hold of you to learn more about how you can help them on any of the things that we talked about, but especially in the area of financial accountability
Yeah.
or those things that I know you're like super experienced on and expert on, how do they get a
Mhm.
hold of you?
The easiest way to reach me is through LinkedIn. it's Panda Ludwig. And I will tell you, there's not a lot of pandas out there. So if you type in panda, you're going to find me. And so I'd love to connect. Let me know, say, hey, I heard you on, there's a solution for that. Let's talk about accountability, or let's talk about not talk about accountability, and that's okay too. Finances are my jam. And if that's something that you're looking on, kind of putting some systems in place and tightening up on, let's have a conversation. So find me on LinkedIn, or my company website is Increase Expert. It's increase.expert. It is a .expert rather than a .com, because Brad, we are the experts.
There you go.
Was that cheesy enough? Cheesy enough to remember it?
It's great. And as always, what I tell people is, like, if you didn't write all that down, but you know us, reach out and we'll put you in touch with Panda, and we'll make sure that you guys can get connected. So thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate you. And then, of course, for those that are, like you said, that did watch this long or listen this long, thanks for tuning in. Hope you subscribe and keep watching, because we've got great content, even more great content coming. So keep subscribing and keep watching and learning. And we really appreciate you being a part of our community. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.
There is a Solution for That is produced by VARC Solutions. This episode was produced by Ashley White and Aaron Riley. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Watch the video version on youtube.com/There's a Solution for That. Or visit varcsolutions.com/podcast, where you'll find our entire podcast archive, as well as show notes, links to solution providers, and complete transcripts of every episode. If you love the podcast, please leave a review with your comments.